Program to discuss this further is Alex Traiman, the CEO and Jerusalem Bureau Chief of the Jewish News Syndicate. Alex, thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So let's start with this new proposal that has been brought forth by Israel. What are the terms of this deal?
Well, it would be another 6 weeks of ceasefire, which would include all of the Muslim holy month of Ramadan, as well as the Passover holiday here in Israel. And in exchange, Israel would receive half of the 25 or 26 living hostages back up front, and then the remaining living hostages, as well as any dead bodies, would come at the end of that 6-week ceasefire deal. And in exchange, Israel willing to release additional prisoners from Israeli jails.
Now, we know that this ceasefire deal, it was laid out in 3 different parts, the first phase of which ended this past Saturday, so just yesterday. What did we learn from what happened during that first phase, and what is going to be taken into account when trying to negotiate this second phase?
Well, I think that the main thing was that the first phases of the deal were put on the table by the Biden administration. And we saw that Steve Witkoff, Trump's special envoy, came to Israel to try to push both sides to accept this deal before President Trump was inaugurated. But the terms were based on the Biden administration principles. Now, we have seen over the last several weeks that the Trump administration has taken a firmer stance with regard to the release of additional hostages. Israel feels like it has further backing, and neither the United States nor Israel feel like it's bound by those administration's terms. So now they're looking at a different formula, which would get Israel back all of the remaining hostages and at least half of those up front.
I want to talk a little bit more about this full backing from the Trump administration that Israel does have. It has been talked about extensively by both President Trump, but several members of his cabinet saying they will support Israel fully in this war. Now, what kind of pressure does that put on Hamas for them to accept the terms of this new proposal?
Well, Prime Minister Netanyahu has always said that the more pressure Hamas feels, the more willing they are in order to release hostages and do what Israel wants it to do. And even Antony Blinken, in his exit interview with the New York Times, basically intimated the reverse, which was when it appeared that there was more pressure coming on Israel, that got Hamas to toughen its stance in any of the negotiations. So certainly Netanyahu feeling that by pressuring Hamas, by threatening essentially to launch a new military campaign in the Gaza Strip, by withholding humanitarian aid from the Strip, that Israel's in a better position to negotiate the release of all the hostages.
We are in an in-between state right now, so to speak, between the first phase and the second phase that still has to be negotiated. So, Alex, what's going on the ground at this moment?
Well, certainly there's a lot of pressure inside Israel domestically on the government to do whatever they can to get the hostages back. At the same time, there's been a massive call up of military, of reserves that had been off essentially for the past several months. As many as 400,000 troops have been mobilized, ready to go back into the Gaza Strip. There's talk of a second military phase, not a ceasefire phase of this war, which would last as long as 6 months, in which Israel would move from north to south once again in the Gaza Strip, moving the civilians out again into humanitarian areas and taking Hamas out of power once and for all. So yes, it's this sort of surreal in-between phase, not knowing if we're going to be in a ceasefire again for another 6 weeks or whether we're about to be in for another several months of war.
Given what we know right now through several of the reports, as in there's kind of this disconnect between both Israel and Hamas, given the terms that they want to reach to find an agreement, how long do you expect this could take before we see exactly what's going to happen next?
I think the next 2 weeks are very important here. Certainly Israel wants to get to a deal. They want to see the hostages back. Hamas wants to know what their status is. I think that within the next couple of weeks, we're going to have a strong indication as to whether Hamas will agree to a deal, whether Israel and the United States run out of patience with Hamas if they do not return to the negotiating table in good faith, and whether or not Israel is going to be launching a new wave of offensive in the Gaza Strip, which will throw this country right back into the throes of war.
And that was pretty much going to be my final question, Alex, is what could happen if we don't reach this deal? And clearly we would go back to seeing what we had seen for the past few months before this first phase was implemented. But Alex, before I let you go, is there anything you feel that you need to add, something we should be on the lookout for, and that you think is important as we continue to follow along this negotiation process?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think the Israeli government's position here is that Hamas needs to be completely disarmed and degraded, and that another military offensive is going to take place. And it's a question of when. So if Hamas decides at this point that they will negotiate, let's say for a 6-week ceasefire period, which would include Ramadan and Passover, and they would give Israel back its hostages. So Israel would withhold fire for that period. However, unless Hamas is going to negotiate essentially to, as one senior Israeli official called to me, to commit suicide at the end of it, there's a very, very strong likelihood that regardless, Israel's going to go back inside the Gaza Strip and try to finish Hamas off once and for all. And they believe that they have the backing of the United States to do so.
Alex Traiman, a CEO and Jerusalem Bureau Chief at the Jewish News Syndicate. We appreciate your time here at Live Now from Fox. You take care.
Thanks for having me.
So we're going to step away for